This is a live mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We're on the air.
We are on the air, okay. Well, welcome to the September 18th, 2019 meeting of the Kennebunkport Planning Board. We have nearly complete. Scott had to be in Atlanta, I believe he said, so he's not here tonight, but everybody else is here, so we'll alternate you two on voting. You can figure out who goes first, I forget.
Okay.
But
We'll figure it out.
yeah, I figured you would. Okay, so, first off, that's attendance. The minutes of the last meeting. Let's see. That's fine, that's fine. Okay, the minutes of the last meeting, I noticed one thing and I told her about it, so hopefully, yeah, there was a slight correction in that it says Mr. Lichty will have voting privileges, where in fact both of them had voting privileges because we had two absences. But anyhow, that was the only correction I found.
I have a question. I didn't know the answer, but I read that on 183 Log Cabin Road, that they had received the updated entrance permit from MDOT. And I knew it had been applied for. It wasn't, do we know that it had been received, or was it just applied for? Or did everyone else?
Yeah, I think it had been, I mean, it had been applied for, for the second, but I don't think we'd seen the final, final sign off.
So I didn't want to say in the minutes that it had been received if we didn't know that.
Okay. So we should correct that.
So that's on item 3, the 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph.
Okay. Minutes are being taken off of the,
Correct.
off of the video, so we need to be careful to speak at all times. Okay.
No, I think the minutes in general are remarkably good consistently. I'm
Yeah.
very pleased. and
So,
It's rare to
with
find
the,
something
with the
wrong.
two corrections, one correction you're discussing there?
Mhm.
What number was the drop?
Item 1
Item 1.
under number 3. So on the second page, 2/3 of the way down.
Oh, yeah. I received an MDOT permit.
Yeah, I think have applied for,
Okay,
it should say.
that's fine. Okay, so there's that and the correction that Larry could also vote. With those two changes,
I'm good with the rest.
okay,
Yeah.
can I have the motion, please?
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
As amended.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, in favor? So you decided to vote first.
Yeah.
So George.
George will be second. Pretty excited. We're doing it in order here.
Yeah, gotta do it the orderly. Okay, which brings us to item 190801, Apple Blossom Lane LLC subdivision, Longview Partners, authorized agent. So. This is the one we had the site walk for.
Correct. Good evening, board members. I want to thank everybody for allowing me to be here and to have your attention. My name is Jim Logan. I'm a site evaluator, septic designer, soil scientist, and wetland scientist with Longview Partners. Many years prior to that was with Frick Associates out of Gorham. Did a lot of work here during the previous 2.5 decades. Back here tonight for Jonathan Trudeau with Apple Blossom Lane. That was the original name of his subdivision road. This was a subdivision approved prior to now in 2008, I believe it was, for his father. And now we're back with what was the back large remaining lot. It was 22+ acres. That's the house, or the lot that had Jonathan's house on it originally. We now have 2 new lots proposed from that original lot. I think they are now listed as potentially Lot 7A, B, and C, because his was originally Lot 7. We first brought our sketch plan to the planning board back in March. It was March 19th. Made our initial presentation, made some references to the natural resources we found at that time. Following that, we did have the site walk on April 22nd. I had, I believe, most of the board members there, if not all of them. Jonathan and I entertained the board that afternoon. I had the property corners flagged along the side of the road, Apple Blossom Lane. We reviewed the location of both of the 2 driveways where they would leave Apple Blossom Lane. If you recall, Lot 7C, which is the larger of the 2 new proposed lots, that includes a permit by rule for a stream crossing. There's several proposed wetland impacts for that relatively long driveway to get to what is a much healthier building site in the rear of the lot. The driveway and the building site are conceived in a fashion that recognizes that the stream, the main thread of the stream that we're trying to avoid is in fact shoreland zoned. We've got a position for a house that recognizes that and complies. The, let's see, we also did, during the site walk the board to the proposed building site on Lot 7B, which was more accessible than 7C, but is very representative of both of the building sites on both proposed lots. The new wetland impacts needed for the driveway on Lot 7C total around 3,356 square feet proposed. That is a number that is added to the original 4,600 square feet approved for the original crossing in 2008. So this project, when it was first approved, had a DEP permit. DEP requirements, if it's a project off of another project, requires that we go back and calculate cumulative impacts. Jonathan would love to know this, but he actually had to pay a fee for the 4,600 square feet that his father impacted, and plus the 3,300 in addition. So we end up paying a fee. The Tier 1 application covers that 3,300 extra square feet, and the permit by rule covers just the stream crossing. So we have two DEP permits that we have filed since the last we were here. And I'll clarify to the board that those submissions were accepted by DEP this past Monday on the 16th of September. Alex there at the DEP, a new staffer, is the project manager for that. She called me yesterday, found the applications to be in order and acceptable for processing. The Tier 1 has a 30 to 45-day turnaround time, where the permit by rule is more of a 14-day time frame. They'll process them both at the same time, and we would expect a permit back from the DEP for both the tier and the permit by rule at the same time. I'd like to think that we have that back to you. By the way, I will submit to the board through Lisa Harmon copies of both that. Well, we already have the permit by rule, I think, submitted to you. We hadn't executed that. The tier application will be submitted so that you have that for your review as well prior to the next meeting. Let's see. And by the way, the Tier 1 approval process would allow fills all the way up to 15,000 square feet before you would have to compensate or address mitigation. So I think that's the reason why I heard back from DEP that they didn't have a whole lot of heartburn, being as we're so significantly less with a total impact less than 15,000. Also provided in the past to you, and you have in your current review, the high-intensity soil survey that we prepared, the report that went with that, the hydrogeologic assessment that suggests that septic systems can be placed on these lots in a fashion that the wells are still going to be safe to be drilled, adequate water supply is there. That hydrogeo report clarifies that. We provided an engineered driveway plan for the roughly 1,000-foot-long driveway that's going to be needed to get from Apple Blossom Lane to the house site on Lot 7C. Felt as though, and predominantly that was because Werner suggested that we get accurate calculations on the culvert sizing for the stream. I had the, because we were going to go to that extent, we got pretty much the full driveway plan. The stormwater calcs were provided as well by that engineer. We are not triggering the main stormwater law in any way, shape, or form, not even permit by rule, though he has provided documentation that runoff due to the 2 additional house sites and the 2 driveways should not be significant to the adjacent properties. And then I guess the only other thing that I would mention to the board, and I did have a discussion with the DEP about this, your information in the rear of your packet included photographs for a small depression that we found on the back of Lot 7C. And we identified this thing after the period when it is officially the counting season for vernal pool egg masses. We were outside the legal time frame, and then what we were allowed to do, due to the exemption in the law, we missed the window for counting. We monitored the site, even though we had the wet June that we did, the law allows for a dry-out date, that if the thing dries out completely in southern Maine by July 15th, we can provide photo documentation, send it to the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and have them recognize it as a not significant vernal pool. We did that diligence. We've reached out to IF&W. We have not yet seen on their website a recognized or recognition of this particular site yet, but we are chasing that down. We think that we have a design that works despite the fact that that depression is there on Lot 7C. It's to the right rear. It's way back here. The house site's going to be way over here, on the opposite side of the watershed divide from where that depression is. So we think we've addressed that. DEP is aware of that, and that will be part of their review as well. We are yet to, my guess is the Army Corps of Engineers will weigh in on this application at some point because it does involve a culvert in what they want to call a navigable waterway of the United States. If you looked at that stream channel, we might debate whether it's navigable, but because it's a wetland of the United States, they potentially have jurisdiction. DEP copies all of the applications we send to them to the Corps, and they have their opportunity to weigh in. So likewise, they'll be looking at the stream crossing and the wetland impacts. We may have some communications back and forth before we iron that all out. But in the hopes that we've got this in about the 99% kind of finished format for you folks. And we'll keep you posted as we have that correspondence back and forth. And I think that brings us to about now, which, you know, that makes it current with you folks. And I think we would hopefully be at a point where you could deem the information complete, and perhaps, if we're lucky, we might hope to get a public hearing for the next go-around. But you'll let us know.
Yeah.
Questions from the board?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Is there a write-up, an overview containing, like, the material you just described? I'm still having trouble getting my head around, just at a high level, what it is we're trying to do here. Are you taking...
It's a two-lot subdivision amendment. Basically, we're adding 2 lots to an existing subdivision.
Let me explain why I'm confused. I've got this 11 by 17 map here that's a bit of an eye chart. And it's got a lot of lots on it. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7A, 7B, 7C.
Your only review is lot 7A, B, and C.
I'm asking you, is there something that tells me that?
I believe we had a project narrative description in here.
I may have lost mine, but I can't seem to put my hands on it. That would help.
I don't believe, well, maybe I didn't provide any kind of an explanation of it. I thought we read it into the public record. I thought it was pretty evident the first sketch plan meeting. But if it would be helpful to the
I
board.
went back and looked at the sketch plan packet as well, and there's none in that either.
No issues. If it would be advantageous to the board, I would put a summary together to better explain it. I tried to do that verbally, but if it's inadequate, let me put something in writing that better describes the
I
chronology.
haven't found it. Did any, okay. Somebody else?
I think maybe just for purposes of the record, and then if and when, you know, we get to findings of fact, it's helpful to hear it from the applicant's own words in writing versus us trying to
Well,
interpret what you're saying.
This is
I
a
guess.
preliminary plan. We don't
No,
get to
I-
find
Right,
facts
right,
on
right.
this
So,
one.
you know, still,
So
it would
hopefully
be helpful.
You can provide it and ultimately put it into the final.
No worries.
So
I
just,
can-
just for my own
No worries.
purposes,
I can
let me
provide
just,
it.
from what I just heard, let me ask a couple of specifics. So you're saying we want to take Lot 7 and divide it into 3 pieces?
One of which currently has a house on it, yes, and 2 new lots to be created from,
So you're going to take 1 lot and turn it into 3?
correct.
Right.
Okay, you're going to add...
Seven A
add-
is the existing house lot, and then B and C are the
Two new ones and 1 existing, essentially, all of which comply with the ordinance.
You know, on the tax map now, is it 1J? Is that what I'm reading? Or is it IJ? map 12, block 2, lots I, 1 through
Part
J.
of 1J.
Yeah, it should be a 1.
So it is. 1J is the total the total lot.
Is the current
Correct.
lot, 1J.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
And in the current application, there was more information in the sketch plan. It said you were not on public water,
Correct. We're still not.
all right? And that's not in this one, though.
Well, we
That I could
provided a
find.
hydrogeologic assessment for well placement. I would think that that would be evident that
Okay.
we still expect to have wells and not public water.
All right, I'll infer it.
With public water, you wouldn't need a hydrogeologic assessment.
Of course not. I had one other nit of a question, perhaps. I wondered what, it says, actions taken by unanimous written consent of the member without a meeting. And it goes on to describe something that the sole member of the company has done. I was wondering why this form was included and what requirement it's satisfying.
There's a,
What
there's a,
purpose does it
there's a
serve?
requirement in your ordinance somewhere that if the entity is incorporated, that we needed to provide paperwork to that. I don't.
You're saying this addresses a Kennebunkport
It
requirement?
may be that it's a DEP requirement. I'm not positive, but for whatever reason, we were requested Jonathan to give us that information. I believe it's a requirement for the DEP app. So you may end up with it. It's part of, when we try to submit information to the board, whatever we submit to DEP, we want to include to the board so that you can see that.
I was just, again, trying to get my head around.
I believe those are
simply what we're doing,
incorporation
and this
papers.
just confused me. That's all. Okay, perhaps we don't need it. Thank you.
They may be ancillary to your requirements.
I have a couple of questions about your waiver submissions and so forth, but I'm a little confused. It looks like you're setting up deeds for these lots that have a lot of restrictions on them.
I think this was a deed that was your original deed with the restrictions that exist now, not the new lots.
Those exist now, because one of those deed restrictions says that you have to take down dead trees, and you're in a lot of woodland. I said, that's really a difficult thing to do. And, and you're also asking for a waiver of specimen trees, and, I wonder how that meshes with that, because, you really, for where you're going to build a house, I think you need to identify specimen
Okay.
trees.
I don't have an issue with that. This is a big piece of woods. This is an old piece of farmland, so there's not a lot of trees of sizable diameter. We can certainly do a review as part of this requirement, and not ask for the waiver request if it's causing heartburn, and I'll go back and we'll try to find the big trees and locate them if that makes a difference. These building areas are relatively limited, given the large lots. So
Yes, I
I was
can
in the
see
hopes
that.
that even if there was a specimen tree in the vicinity of one of those building sites, we may still be able to remove it possibly with the likelihood of a big amount of woods preservation otherwise, given the juxtaposition of uplands and wetlands getting back to that building site. But I hear what you're saying, and there's certainly no trouble. Neither one of these building windows is that large to go back and review for specimen trees. So we can remove that request for a waiver.
Well, I think you could get around that simply by saying that nothing will be taken down except in the building area. But then you might have to identify specimen trees. The deed restrictions carry over to the two lots you're going to have, basically, because the one on animals is really strange.
Can I piggyback on that? So one of the deed restrictions says that the lots can no longer be subdivided. Did you catch, has that restriction been removed, or? Okay.
That would certainly need to be removed.
Number 7 says further subdivision of the lot is prohibited. So do you know who put that restriction in the deed? Where that restriction came from?
Use the microphone.
It would have been Fred. And I have to
That
be
might be an
honest, I
issue.
was here with Fred with that submission, but I had very little control over what was submitted. So I
Okay.
guess to the extent that, again, that might be causing some heartburn, we'll have Jonathan go back and maybe make some revisions to those, not maybe, but obviously make some revisions to
Yeah.
those deed restrictions.
I just wasn't sure if it got included in the deed from yourself into Apple Blossom, or was that restriction, has that been in the chain for a while?
So then we would expect to modify the deed restrictions from the previous deed before we got back here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess whoever has the right to remove or release or terminate that restriction,
Yeah.
that would need to be determined.
So Nina, to get back to your comment, we would be safe then to just put a protective note on the plan that says the only tree clearing that happen on these lots would be within the driveway and the building window.
Yeah,
Good.
and identify any specimen trees there and see if you can get around them,
Yep.
maybe.
That lot actually got, the 47 fire too, mostly cleaned out.
Yeah.
So there are a few big trees that were left.
We can find them.
But you might take a look at that and before you even request a waiver, see what you have there. Well, you answered my question about vernal pools. I was getting a little confused here. All you're doing right now is dividing the lots. You're not building anything, right? So you want to just sell the lots or give them
No,
ours?
let me be clear on that. We're here for the family.
Okay.
That's Jonathan's sister.
Hello.
She's moved back to Maine from out of state. She's the.
Well, that's one.
That is one. The other one, I think the other one, Jonathan, is not so clear on that, but I would think you'd build on that one too and not just sell it.
Yeah.
As a builder, he wants to control what happens there,
Right.
so
Okay.
they're not gonna just be for sale.
But it says that basically you don't need, what I'm reading is that you're not triggering Maine stormwater law right now. But when you build, I assume you have to come back and look at that?
With the stormwater law, yes.
Yes.
Yes, because basically, you're right, that's a good nuance to pick up on, is that when the developer only makes the infrastructure and sells the lots, they're responsible only for the infrastructure. When the house gets built, if the entity is the same, we need that stormwater review following the initial infrastructure to make sure that the house and all the new impervious surface that might be created there also complies with that stormwater law.
Okay, well, I was also questioning whether you need it to put in the culverts.
No,
No.
no, it's a 20,000 square foot limitation, and we're disturbing less than 20,000 square feet. 20,000 to 40,000 is where you have a stormwater permit by rule, and you notify DEP. You're still not triggering actual stormwater permit until you do 1 acre of impervious or greater.
Okay.
So I'm pretty confident that it isn't until that second stage of building the house where that might be a question. In which case, I don't know that it would be the board's purvey, but it would be burden of proof back to the town code enforcement office to make sure that the individual lot itself upon development didn't trigger stormwater.
Okay.
That would be something that could also be conditioned with a note on the plan.
Okay. Well, other than that, and the weird deed restrictions and the restrictions on the building, taking a look at that, I think I'm okay. I have no more questions anyway.
Werner,
Yes.
This is a significant piece of data. Is this something we normally would submit for peer review?
So, the specific question and concern that I had, and Jim touched on it briefly, was just the culvert sizing. We wanted to make sure, just because it was identified, a floodplain identified stream, that, that the culvert was sized appropriately to match, what the flow calcs were. So that's up to the board, as far as whether or not you want to have a peer review done, on those calculations or not.
This is an engineer that I've used before with the town and had previous approvals. He's the same engineer that designed and sized the culverts for the Oak Ridge Estates that I did a few years ago off of Oak Ridge Road there, off of Goose Rocks. And that was a 1,000-foot actual subdivision road, full subdivision road that was built there. And the board at that time had no problem with the calculations of that engineer, and that project went through all its oversight by the DEP and the Corps. And they looked very carefully at culvert sizing at that point, but I'll leave it up to you. I think that based on what the Army Corps of Engineers requires now, where they want 1.5 times the bank width, we've got culverts that are probably way bigger than are required for the acreage of the watershed. Because Army Corps now is wanting the culverts bedded 6 inches into the bottom of the stream channel. They're requiring culvert sizes much larger than DEP ever did. And we're finding the need to put big pipes in where we didn't used to put such big pipes in. So if anything, I'm seeing the trend the other way. And we're oversizing pipes a little bit. But I'd leave it up to the board whether or not you felt like Jonathan had to pay for another review.
Any,
Yeah, I mean, my initial reaction was that I didn't have any concern with the sizing of it, but, but this is something that's, whenever we look at, when we go through subdivision review process, if there is something that you want a peer review on, then, it's within your purview to ask for it.
yes,
But,
all right. Is there anything, anyone on the board wanted reviewed of this package?
I don't really have any concerns.
Okay. Well, I guess we're gonna save you some money.
Well, thank you. I can
Anyway,
appreciate that.
any more questions on this plan? Now, Apple Blossom Lane is a private
It is
road
private.
At this point?
I think it intends to stay private as well.
Oh, good. Then we don't have to deal with that subject. Very
I'm
good.
trying to make your job as easy as I
Yeah,
can.
Okay, so are we ready to say this application is complete? You're gonna provide a little, narrative, one page, whatever.
Yep, I have that written.
the Intro for us. And, so, may I, hear a motion on the completeness?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor? Okay. So, we will have a early October public hearing. What's,
Is that something we can officially set tonight, or?
yes. I
Okay,
just have
great.
to-
At the next meeting.
The
correct?
next meeting,
yep, October 2nd.
which would be October the 2nd.
Okay, good. And I'll plan to have a submission into Lisa Harmon in adequate time so that you'll have ample time to review that before that public hearing.
Good,
Okay?
very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you later. There's another long view coming up. Okay, next up, we have item 190803, Hidden Pond Sebago Techniques. Authorized agents. This is again an initial review of the site plan. This is not a public hearing. Just likely public hearing would be again, if things go normally, it would be October 2nd, so.
Thank you. I'm Steve Doe from Sebago Technics. Also with me tonight is Ralph Austin, here on behalf of Hidden Pond LLC. I don't know, I think this is a totally different board from when this has been approved. I can go through the whole history of the project or just focus on kind of what they're looking to do now. Just focus on the
latter, as far as I'm concerned.
the latter?
Yeah.
Okay.
The matter before the board.
Okay, so this was approved for, this was built in 2 phases, just for some quick history. So roughly from here towards Goose Rocks was Phase 1, and then in the back was Phase 2, earth, and some 1-bedroom units are in the back. That was Phase 2. So we're working on Phase 1, where there was 26 cottages originally approved. 10 of them were not built, just because of market. So now they're at a point where they'd like to build these units. They could proceed with where they were originally with the unit types, but markets have changed since this was approved, so they are looking at a new kind of unit for the development, which brings it back to the planning board for an amended site plan. We've cited the units generally in the same location as they originally were approved with some minor changes. The first section, which is right here, which is 5 cottages, those are generally in the same location as the original. And then down here, this section here, they're slightly different, but the same general location is the same. So now I'm just going to enlarge those particular areas, kind of zoom into those particular sites. So this is the first 5 cottages as you come in, this being the main road coming in. These cottages are sited in the woods. And then these 3 cottages are accessed, well, let me kind of back up. Each cottage gets, they're 2-bedroom cottages, and they each get 2 parking spaces. That's just required in the ordinance. So each cottage has 2 parking spaces in various locations. So this cottage will have 2 parking spaces here. This cottage will have 2 here. This one will have 2 over here. And then there'll be a path that takes them to their cottage. This particular path also serves as a fire lane, so that the fire department has access to these locations. I have talked to Chief Everett on that. He was concerned about the length of it with no ability to turn around. So we're actually going to create a turnaround in this location, right where this walkway is, so he has an ability to back up and then come out with a fire truck in that location. This cottage will have 2 spaces here, and this one will have 2 spaces here. These are served by septics and wells. This particular location already has wells that were drilled back in 2007 or 8 when they first started the project. There's a well back here, and then there's a well over here. And those are the wells that are going to serve these 5 cottages. The septic system, I don't know how familiar you are with the Hidden Pond area. If you're heading out to Earth, you come down the paved section, you go off on the gravel back to Earth. There's an area right over here called the farm. That's where all the flower gardens are. There's some arbors and a small little building there. That's where the septic system is. That is one of the larger septic systems on the property. Currently, there's only 2 cottages actually that go to that field. It was built back at the original development to serve all of these cottages. And I believe only these 2 cottages over here actually go to that field.
Steve, when you say the original development,
I'm sorry,
7, 8?
2007,
Okay,
they built
yeah.
that septic field.
Got it.
It's just not being fully,
It didn't predate that, wasn't there for the mobile home park
no,
before
no.
that? Okay,
No,
got
it was built, and I think only 2 cottages go to it, maybe 4.
Thank you.
But it was designed to handle these 10 new units.
Got it.
So anyway, that's right here, that's where these 5 systems will be pumped to that field area. Just another thing, the dark green areas are wetlands. We have a little bridge crossing over here, and that's primarily for kind of a loop, footpath, bike path. And then I'll go to the second section. So this area, there was a thing called Pete's Bikes. This is where they currently rent bikes, or not rent bikes, but that's where guests can pick up bikes. So now we're gonna come in with a road with a full loop around, so this will be fire accessible. And then again, these cottages are located, you know, in the wooded areas. We're adding 2 new wells to this location. We got a well proposed over here and another well over here to serve these 5 units. And again, these 5 will be pumped to that septic field. We have met with, just stand up there. As far as abutters, we have met with Ed Bassett, is here tonight. He actually lives right here. During the original project, there was a lot of neighbors in this area that was concerned about the development, and primarily for the septic and wells. So we've met with Ed, given the concerns he had originally and the proximity of this development to his home. And based on that, we're gonna make a couple little modifications to the plan. So originally, we have this evergreen planting that's along in the buffer area. We're actually now gonna put a fence, a 6-foot-high fence, to block the views, maybe buffer a little bit of sound. And we're actually gonna move these evergreens further into the woods and put the fence on the development side. So he's looking at the evergreens with the fence behind it. And that's gonna start from down here, this being the corner of his property, and that'll continue all the way back to a point here. His house is located right over here. So that's a change we're gonna be making to accommodate Ed. Also, there was a letter submitted by Ed on behalf of the association in that neighborhood. So there's an association that lives down here on Ox Plow Lane, and there may even be more units further down. If I can find his letter in here. Which I think the board received that. So they were concerned with groundwater and their wells, essentially is kind of the short of it. And during the original project, there was those were original concerns back then. So they've asked for some recommendations or kind of requirements of what they would like to see. We agree with those and are looking to proceed in that direction. With the original project, with the septic system being right here, there's 2 monitoring wells on the property that are monitored twice a year. One close to the system and one at the property line. Our office performs those tests, and then we file that with Werner, and also goes to Mr. Bassett. And I think Cerise might get one too, which is, she lives over here. They have a well located there. So anyway, we've been monitoring their well water quality. Now that we're going to be adding more waste to this field, obviously the nitrate levels will probably pick up. Currently, there's no issues, but anticipating that there may be issues, we're actually going to install a denitrification system for this septic system, kind of as a precautionary measure to kind of just nip that right off now. We're also employing SW Cole to do an analysis of the wells and the bedrock in that area, which I think gets into what their concerns are. So hopefully we'll have that kind of present to the board and kind of understand what may be happening out there, if anything.
You had one denitrification system?
We're going to add one. We only got the one septic system, so that's the one that we're going to add it to.
I see. Okay,
Yeah, right now, there's a pre-treatment system on it, but it's not a denitrification system.
understood.
And the nitrates are what is the concern for well contamination.
I didn't appreciate there was only there's the one septic
There's
that we're
one
talking
septic
about.
field,
Thank
yes,
you.
and there's one here just for these cottages. There's other ones on the property, but they're well into the property and
I
don't
see. Okay,
present an
thank you.
issue.
Thank you.
There's a septic field over here, there's another one over by the lodge.
No, I'm sure that's what was confusing me, is I knew I had read that there were multiple, but
There's multiple,
this
yes.
is the location we're talking about.
Yes.
Got it.
So those are some additional things that we're going to be doing. And I think that's all I needed to present. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
I had some questions about, one, the history, the use of the property. I know that in the past, there were problems, I think it was around the restaurant.
Yes.
There were problems with overloading of the septic system.
Yes.
Can you go through that history and how it was remedied?
So the Earth Restaurant is here, their septic field is over here. And with restaurants, there's a lot of grease that comes out of that. And it really was, if I recall it, and Werner can probably even fill in if I'm missing some holes, because he was involved in that process, they were not being cleaned on a regular basis. So that grease was filling up the tanks, and of course, that grease then eventually gets into the field, and then the field failed. So what ended up happening is we put, I can't remember if we put additional grease traps in there. We basically rebuilt the whole field. The whole septic field was replaced, enlarged. There was some water testing or water usage that had occurred prior to that, so we knew how much water was actually going to the field. There was a larger volume of water, I think, that was also going to it. So those have all been corrected, new field put in, and then they have a monitoring system and how often they have to pump the grease, and basically just checking the field constantly. There's actually, if I remember right, there's actually 2 field areas out there, and they have a valve that they switch, I think, once a week, every 2 weeks. So the waste goes to one field area, and then 2 weeks they switch it to the next field area, so that first one has a chance to rest, and it goes back and forth like that throughout the summer. And then, of course, it has all summer or all winter to rest by spring.
Originally, on the findings of fact for the development, there was to be monitoring at regular intervals. Was that done?
Originally,
Yes.
I suspect not, since it failed. Yeah. I think that was part of the issue, that it wasn't happening.
Yeah.
And maybe Ralph, if Ralph has any, but I believe that's what the concern was.
Yeah.
I'd have to look back at the specific findings. There's multiple findings relative to this
Right.
property.
Yeah.
But almost all of them have.
Have some level of,
Some level of monitoring of the
requirement for
septic
monitoring.
system
Yeah.
and so forth. And
Yeah.
I think you would want that with these as well.
Yes, especially now
Okay.
that it's coming up to full usage, this field.
Okay.
The monitoring well, the monitoring wells for this system, that does happen twice a year. That's been ongoing for quite a
Mm-hmm. Okay.
while, so.
and we do get a copy of those reports,
Okay.
that come in on a yearly basis. Yep.
Well, can you describe a little more? You're talking about putting in houses that are up on stilts, that are sort of tree houses. Was it approved for 2-bedroom houses?
It was,
It was. Okay.
yes.
And some of the sketches I see, I'm going to go right back to glass in the woods and bird strikes. So, I'm looking at the plans for these things, and I'm saying, okay, you're putting houses in the woods, you're putting them up fairly high, trees are going to reflect in there. What are you going to do to help prevent bird strikes?
Well, these aren't that, they're not like up here. They're just really
Right.
essentially 2-3 feet off the ground, built on piers versus a full foundation. They're not any different than the windows that they have out there today. You know, some will have screens, some may be, just glass windows. It's not like this is a full, there's not like a lot of glass. It's a typical house type structure.
Are they
Right.
casement windows or are they
I'm not sure if they're double hung.
double hung? Because double hungs have the screens on the outside.
They would have screens on them, yes.
Which is a big improvement
Yes.
compared to not having screens.
let me
Of
look
course,
at the
casements
other-
are on the inside, so they don't work as well.
Yeah. So actually, now that I'm looking at the plan, the elevations, they all look like they're double hung windows.
Okay.
And there are screen porches, and those are just going to have, obviously just have screens on them.
Well, screen porches in front of windows are no problem. Windows that face trees can be a problem.
Right.
And the other question I had and concerning putting housing in the woods and so forth is light pollution. And I looked at the pictures of the type of lights that you plan to put up there, and it's probably the same throughout the rest of it, but I think that's a very poor choice. It allows light to penetrate upwards as well as outwards into the woods, and it's going to affect the flora and fauna around there. I think you should consider putting in some other type of lighting that at least directs light downward and uses a minimum lumens or wattage or whatever.
Yeah, these are
however-
just 100-watt bulbs is all these are.
Okay,
They're not a, bright fixture. It's really just like you'd have out at your driveway, a lamp post is all these are.
right.
Light
but-
levels here are very low. I mean,
Okay,
these are
but I
just-
still don't think you need to project that light upwards or outwards. I think what you really need it for is basically to light walkways and paths and so forth.
right. Okay. We'll look at, see what else may be out there that's more downward directed.
I don't have any other questions.
Nope.
No other questions?
The only, I guess, it's more of a request than a question is, and I know on one of the plans, I think it was either the first or second plan in the set you sent, it shows the differentiation between the original plans that were approved
Yeah,
and the
that's this
new
plan.
plan. Is it possible, just for our edification, to get a copy of the original one that was approved?
Sure.
I think it would just be helpful to see, I'm assuming that's on record.
It is, but we have a copy of it,
Yeah,
so.
it would
I
just
can-
be good to see.
Okay. Like 11 by
Specifically what was
17, or
approved.
you want to see full size of those?
I'm not sure that a full size is required, I don't know.
11 by 17 is probably
11
fine.
by
Yeah,
17, we
yeah.
can, okay. So we'll get you one of both locations,
Yeah, that'd be great.
so you can see that.
Okay, you guys have anything? Okay. So, I guess it's complete.
So moved?
I'll second.
Okay, favor? All right, so October 2nd, public hearing?
Great.
And if you can provide that extra data to us before that, that'd be great.
I will. Great, thank you very much.
All right. So that leads us to item 190802, and we get to hear from Mr. Logan again. James and Susan McMahon, Longview
Do
Partners
you want an agenda?
LLC agent, a preliminary minor review, changing lot lines on Northwood Road. Oh, speaking of, before you start, Jim, I didn't assign people for the first two items, Apple Blossom and Hidden Pond. So
I'll take one of them. I don't
I'll do
care.
Hidden Pond. I'll do Hidden Pond.
Okay.
Hidden Pond.
Okay,
I'll take apple blossom.
okay, good. What a team. That's great. I think I'm going to assign McMahon to the absent person. I sent him an email to that effect, so,
Nice guy. That'll teach him.
yeah. Well, you know. Okay, Jim, go right ahead.
Good evening again. My second presentation tonight is for Dr. Jim McMahon and his wife Susan. They are the owners of what are 2 lots in Bishop Farm Woods. And we're basically here tonight to sound the board on a couple, 2 or 3 different items. I took the liberty of making some hand sketch notes and so forth prior to going to Lee and Blood's office for the changes. So recognize, I know this looks a little cartoonish, but the idea was for us to get here with the applicant and sound the board on some of these, basically pretty simple changes that would not affect any of the abutting lot owners. These are only internal changes. Dr. McMahon was here a number of years ago with a plan revision also that had to do with this box right here, which was around his house. Originally, his house wasn't constructed in exactly the right position as it was shown on the plan.
It was constructed before plan was approved, and the approved plan.
Revised.
The house is
Okay, so there was a minor revision done to this lot a while back at the planning board. The reason for us being here today is, and I think I did a better job summarizing this particular one, the proposed revisions, pretty simply, and this all pretty much originated when Dr. McMahon went to a local broker to look at the unbuilt lot. Originally, Frick Associates, my old company, had a septic design right here in what was pretty much the primary building location for that lot. And that caused some heartburn because it was competing for the obvious house site on that lot. This was the way Leon originally got it.
Can I just ask you, just for a second, just step back, what are we looking at here? What's up on the,
I was trying to give you some background,
so
sorry.
I understand that, but
We're asking-
I'm trying to see, are we looking at 1 lot or 2 lots here, or
There are
more than
currently
2?
2 lots.
2 lots.
They're the owner of both of them.
They're both on this
They are.
cartoon, right?
Well, no, it's a real survey plan, it's just I've cartoonized it some with the proposed changes.
I didn't mean that in a disparaging way. It is a, yeah.
Here, let me do this.
So this is a 2-lot subdivision that was approved at some point in time, you're
No, it
saying?
was-
No.
Initially, it was all of Bishop Woods. I don't know how many lots was in the
I see.
original Bishop Woods.
So this is
This
two
is-
2 lots of the Bishop Woods subdivision.
Was always 2 lots within Bishop Woods. All we're doing tonight is asking for a revision of the common line between the 2 lots that he owns, one of which has a house pre-existing, the other one which is still vacant.
Gotcha.
Got it?
Got it now, okay, I think.
This is the dividing line of that lot as it is today. Okay? This is the big one. And the rest of it is Dr. McMahon's other lot. This is the existing home on that lot. Okay? Given that, we have 3 requests, primarily. He's got a deed that originally had a shared driveway. Right here, this section that's crosshatched was shared. And Dr. McMahon came to me saying, would it be possible to consider a different driveway for the new lot instead of a shared one? And prior to coming here, I went to Werner and discussed it with Werner. We did a review of the town zoning map, found that the wetland in question here is not shoreline zoned by the town. Werner didn't see any problem with removing the easement and creating a second driveway if we had no problem with the DEP. We visited the DEP prior to coming here. We had Lucian Langlaw of the DEP to the site. He clarified that it's perfectly legitimate to put a second culvert into that stream channel and provide for a second driveway. So one of our revisions is to request the board consider the removal of that easement to a new proposed driveway for that lot. That's number one. We've already prepared a permit by rule.
For which lot are you going to put the new driveway in? The
new
left-hand
lot.
one? The what?
For the lot that's vacant.
The vacant lot.
The vacant lot.
Ah, okay, because
New-
they both
it's
exist,
not a
is
new
what we
lot. It's not-
decided.
My mistake. It's not a new lot. The vacant lot.
Okay.
There's
Where's
one
the
with a
new
house, there's
driveway
one without
for-
a house.
for
It's
Dr.
parcel,
McMahon?
parcel B.
And understand, the reason for,
Trying to catch up here.
the reason for this deliberation is the fact that Dr. McMahon and Susan, his wife, have long looked at the vacant lot next door and how could they possibly make it better? That's all. We've got two large lots here, both of which meet minimum standards for net residential acreage, and both allow for some minor change of the lot line without affecting net acreage at all.
Sure.
Okay? So, having done that, again, this was item number one. Item number two was to revise the setbacks as Leon Blood showed them. Because Leon's setbacks assume that this whole thing is a wetland of special significance, and it's the shoreline zone wetland. Hence, he has 75-foot offsets everywhere, which significantly restrict this lot. DEP has confirmed for us the only 75 feet they care about is the one off the brook. The 75 Leon voluntarily put on this lot is not what the DEP or the town ordinance requires. And alternative to that 75-foot setback, notwithstanding the stream setback, we would like to revise that to the voluntary 25-foot that's common to all the rest of the subdivisions I work in the town of Kennebunkport. Because DEP would let us go right to the edge of those wetlands, and I didn't want to let anybody think they could go right to the edge of them with any kind of a construction. So we were going to ask to revise here, where it's 75, nowhere near the brook, to revise that down to 25 feet, thus still providing separation and protection to the wetland in excess of the state's minimum, sort of in keeping with what, as I said, my experience with your board is. So that was number two.
Sorry, and the state minimum is 0?
The state would let, the DEP would let you build to the edge of this wetland.
Okay.
Yes. So that was number two
Could
request.
I
Yep.
ask a question on number one again? I'm sorry. When
Back
you
to
say
the-
remove the easement, the driveway, the current driveway is there.
Yes,
But
and
it
it will
doesn't need an
stay,
easement for-
and it
for
will
his
stay
own
there and be
driveway.
for the exclusive use of this well.
Right.
The idea was, here's the proposed new location. Again, we've got that approved by the DEP as a permit by rule,
Okay.
right here. And accessing this piece of upland to get to a house site here. Okay?
Sorry, one more point of clarification. What parcel is encumbered by the easement and what parcel is
The
benefited by it?
existing home lot, Parcel A is the one that has the easement for shared
That's burdened
driveway.
by it. So that's, you want to get rid of the easement on parcel A.
Right.
Okay,
And
so
and
parcel A-
create the driveway on parcel B.
Okay.
So
All right.
parcel A will just have the driveway, but he doesn't need to
Correct. It
have an
won't be-
easement for his own driveway.
Right.
So
And-
for that purpose is really what you're talking about for the boundary line adjustment is just where that bumps in. You're talking
No, don't
about,
be confused. The boundary line adjustment you're referring to is a third thing,
okay, we'll get there.
okay? That's my number three. Don't, you're
We
taking,
sorted out
I'm
one
jumping
and two
ahead.
now,
robbing
right?
my thunder, right?
Yeah, sorry.
No. So yeah, number one and two were the previously discussed items.
I don't
Number-
think, can we just slow down a little bit? On item 2, you want to change an existing setback of 75 foot to what?
25.
No.
Is it
What is it a setback from and to? From the wetlands to what?
To what would be a building area, a proposed building site, something that
So you
could
want to be able to build something to within 25 feet of the wetlands, not 75 feet?
Correct.
So the
Correct.
building envelope, if you will.
Reducing the 75 as it's shown to 25, only in areas adjacent to the wetlands that have no water body. Those are typical forested wetlands, not considered to be wetlands of special significance by the DEP, thus not getting a 75-foot setback.
I'd ask my learned code enforcement officer, is that consistent with practice?
That's correct. You know, I mean, one thing that, that is sometimes a point of contention and concern on my part is that if you show setbacks on a plan, you know, generally speaking, you assume that there's a reg that, you know, that has required that.
Yeah.
You know, and in this particular case, you know, I mean, Jim's correct in the sense that this particular wetland, you know, per the town's regs, doesn't require setback to it. And oftentimes, you know, a 25-foot setback gets shown on there because, you know, we know that, again, not something that we necessarily require, but, you know, in terms of permitting, oftentimes, you know, DEP will allow for permit by rules for activities, you know, within that 50-foot swath, so from 75 down to 25. But then once you trip into that 25 area, you know, the paperwork grows substantially, you know, and so, you know, oftentimes, you know, just for ease of permitting, you see these 25-foot, you know, and they often get classified as setbacks when in all reality, it's not necessarily a regulatory setback.
You're
So
identifying the building envelope.
right, so it gets a bit confusing when you see plans that are setbacks because you automatically assume that there's a reg that's calling that out that says that it has to be there in the first place. But
Do I understand you to say that the 25-foot is not called out in the Kennebunkport?
no, we don't have a 25, we don't have a
We don't
25-foot
have a
setback
setback from a forested wetland.
on an insignificant non-shoreland, you know, non-shoreland zoned wetland.
Thank you.
You know, so, you know, oftentimes you get this mix, you know, of what shows up on a plan of trying to guide property owners, you know, into what's good practice. But I just want to be clear that, you know, this isn't a regulatory setback that gets, you know, that may get shown. Because then oftentimes folks will go and look for the language and it's, well, there is no language, but it's
And
what's
again,
shown on the
I
plan.
would, just to clarify again, my experience in front of the Kennebunkport Planning Board with subdivisions has been to offer the 25-foot setback to make the decision process easier, to buy that distance, if you will, to the wetland. And we could discuss structure setbacks and disturbance that might still go to the edge of the wetland. I figure if we're going to get the building back to that 25-foot setback, then we're going to be able to have a better success at protecting the wetland.
Yeah, I mean, the practical reality winds up being is that if you have a building envelope that has that 25-foot buffer, I mean, practical reality of it is that there's going to be disturbance around that area. So if someone builds up to that 25, by the time you get done building the house, you know, with excavation and backfill and all of that, you know, it provides, I would say, a safe buffer, you know, to, you know, ensure that there's a good opportunity to prevent any type of impact to the wetland. I'm nervous when I see envelopes that go directly to a wetland because to me that's not realistic.
It's not practical.
You know, it's not a realistic expectation that there won't be any impact.
Werner, how would this apply to a non-conforming existing structure?
So if you had give me an example of that.
You've got a house and it's 50 feet from a wetland. Could you then put a structure that was closer to the wetland, adjacent to that house?
So I'll say it depends on what the wetland is. You know, it depends on how the wetland gets classified as to whether or not you can go any closer to it. You know,
Okay.
so if it's freshwater forested, it's not a shoreland zoned wetland, and you're not providing any direct impact, and there's no other issues, then that building could, you know, or I should say, the disturbance could go up to that. Now, if somebody encroaches into that wetland, it may trigger a DEP permit, you know, require for a DEP permit, not necessarily a town permit, but a DEP permit, you know.
So-
and those are elements that we typically require.
So the classification is a forested, freshwater wetland?
Correct.
Not in the shoreland protection zone?
You got it. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
And when you're showing on the lower left portion of the chart, a 75-foot you're going to add a 75-foot setback. Is that a topic? Is that the same topic?
It's a subset of this topic that is absolutely a requirement of the DEP, no two ways about it, and we want to show that on the plan and continue to adhere to that. That stream channel is by definition a Natural Resources Protection Act stream meeting 2 of 5 of criteria for a litmus test, to include it as a water body in the state of Maine, protected by DEP's water protection or water body protection rules. Thus, it as its own entity gets the
So
75.
that requirement has been there from day one, but it hasn't been shown on the plan. You want to add it.
I want to enhance it to make it clear. Leon actually has a window, an edge. It's not very well, because this is a reprint of a reprinted plan. He did have a 75-foot offset for the
Okay.
wetland that was around the pond, the stream. Again, it's not the wetland triggering the 75-foot offset. It
It's
is
the
the
stream.
stream channel itself. So I want to enhance and revise his location modestly and make it clear that that's.
Call attention to it.
Correct.
Thank you.
We ready to move on to number 3?
Yeah, can't wait.
Number three is this little earlobe that sticks out, this ear that originally, and still is part of this lot. That square is the leach bed for this dwelling.
I'm
And-
sorry, it's a part of which lot?
Could we call this lot number 1 and lot number 2?
Well,
Or
it's
A and B?
A
Yeah.
and B, that's good. Okay.
This is, in this blue area, the crosshatch is what I've assigned as a possible land swap between the two. So we would propose a lot line here to make this lot line then much more uniform, and this ear, if you will, then would go to this lot. Now, bear with me. Your ordinance reads, and I vetted this all with Werner before I came here, really is, it's a little bit of a complicated matter in that your ordinance doesn't allow the creation of new lots in a subdivision if the septic system is not on the lot with the dwelling it serves. Okay? I'm asking for that
Makes sense.
consideration in a revised kind of a lot line here from the board, because it's a sensible thing, number one, because it's existing lots, not newly created ones. So it may be appropriate to consider an easement, if, bear with me now. In other words, this then would become part of this lot. This septic system, which is still functioning and connected to this house, would remain by easement connected to this house until it failed or until this lot sold. Then we're gonna abandon this. This easement will go away, and a replacement system for this house will be built right here. So all I'm asking for the board today is this adjustment with a legal septic easement only until such time this fails, or he elects to sell or build over here, then we abandon this, the easement goes away, and we propose a system here.
And what's the benefit of doing that?
What's that?
What's the benefit of doing that? You said it was reasonable. I'm
The
looking
benefit
to
is he gets
understand
to
that.
continue to use a leach bed that's perfectly functioning.
But
Until
don't change the lot line and he can still use it.
Yeah.
I don't understand
By
what
the
problem
land.
you're solving.
The land swap is intended to make for.
Why?
Again, I stated earlier, if you bear.
straight.
No, it's to enhance a building site right here
Okay.
and make this all one, that's all. The septic site I proposed for a house lot here is right here, right now. This would allow, abandonment of this would allow the house to be here and a replacement or a new system for this house right here, in a sensible location. That's the reasonability factor. All I'm asking is that the McMahons get to continue to use this until they're ready to build on this lot or that fails. And that's common. If the board was comfortable with this, I didn't want to do this at his expense until such time as we ran the concept by the board. But part of your review in the future might include this replacement design for this house, which would then be on file with the town hall.
So I just want to clarify, I just heard you say, and I didn't hear it the first time, that the septic easement would last until it failed, obviously, or until a building is built here. When a building is built here, you build a new septic system, and
And
the
abandon
new
this.
structure would have a new septic system there.
That's correct.
Okey dokey. Thank you.
All in the purvey and the control of the code office, because these things would be on
I'm
file.
sorry, George, I missed that. You got it that time, but I missed
Okay,
it.
so
You can play it.
here's the deal. They would like
Okay.
to do a land swap so that they can have a building envelope that makes more sense for them.
Bingo.
And in doing so, the land they want to swap is where their septic system is.
Bingo.
So the easement will allow them to continue to use that. Now, they could be required to just build a whole new septic system and abandon that septic system.
I
and
don't
leave it
see
on
where
lot.
I see where one piece of the swap is. Where's the other piece?
Down where the driveway is.
That's not a swap as much as it's just taking away an easement. This is the only real swap of land. The land that's here would end up with this lot, where currently this land is with this lot.
You want to gift
It's a gift,
Lot
it's not a
B
swap.
with something that is on A. That's not a swap.
You're not getting an equal amount of
Well,
land back.
Correct, it's not a swap, but it's an adjustment. Again, I'm gonna reiterate to the board, net residential acreage is met here, and this land going to here
get
won't affect
better
either
building
one of
on
them.
Okay, I
do we
have a
care, I
question
guess?
for Warner then. Since, since the subdivision regs, actually describe, the restriction on this, is this a waiver to a subdivision reg? Are we going to have to consider it a waiver, and does it take it out of the minor revision rule?
Well, he's not creating a new lot here.
Okay.
I mean, this is a modification to a previously approved plan, and so I think it still stays within the final, instead of going through preliminary and final, I think this stays as a minor revision.
Okay.
When you look at the description of what constitutes a minor revision.
Okay.
Yeah, now, if he was asking to create another lot here, then I would completely agree with that it then trips into a major. But I think this
But
stays in minor.
do we have to consider it as a waiver or just an adjustment?
Well, the reg that we're talking about here, specifically talks about the creation of new lots, which
Okay.
this isn't,
Which is
and
gonna
so
adjust the line.
I don't know that it's necessarily a waiver. I mean, because it's not
It's not a new lot?
It's not a new lot.
Okay.
You're dealing with, with a previous approval here.
And both lots are owned by the same
Correct.
owner.
And my other point, I guess, would be this is not an easement intended to be in perpetuity. This would be an easement only at such time in the future to be extinguished. So basically, that was, the idea was it was going to be a temporary easement only at such, because this is a perfectly functioning field. I understand the comment that he could be forced to just remove it and build the new thing. And if money was no object, no problem. But boy, it breaks my heart that a perfectly functioning leach bed would have to be abandoned at this time just to make this land lot line change.
But actually, there are three situations here. It's when the septic tank fails, it's when a new house is built, or it's if he decides to put a new septic system in.
Right, I guess he could elect to do that on his own. That's
Okay.
true.
I'll ask the board, it seems to me that the business before us is to allow or not allow an adjustment to the property line. The business of the easement seems to me to be a business between the two property owners, which in
Other
this
than I
case are
want-
the
right.
same owner.
Assuming that it's okay to have the septic
Well,
leaching field on a separate property.
And it's part of the reason why this is in front of the board, because this is within your purview to make that call. I think it is important to understand, why that particular, language was put in, in the situation, I think that, that we dealt with. I mean, we had, we had looked at some applications in the past where, you had, an individual lot that wound up with, quite a few septic fields on.
Ocean Sound, I believe it was.
Yeah,
Was it
Ocean
not?
Sound was one of them.
Off of Ocean Avenue.
Yeah, the Ledges was another one, where, what we started to see was one lot in a subdivision that may have had 3 or 4 or more septic fields on that particular lot, for the subdivision. And so this became more, a question of, all right, so, from a practicality perspective, and then also, I think from a little bit of an equity issue and a confusion issue. I mean, I'm dealing with one situation now, same thing, old subdivision in town that has this easement, where we've got 3 or 4 lots that are all going to a common septic field, and trying to navigate exactly what's going to happen as far as the buildability, of that particular piece. So, Hence why we wound up with, a change to the regs that said, you know what, if you're gonna create a lot, let's keep it simple, and make sure you've got your own septic on your own lot. In order to really prevent kind of the massing of all these common systems onto one particular lot, that would have the potential of burdening, a future property owner, with all those things. I mean, 25, 30 years, who wants their, entire yard potentially dug up for a replacement of, 4 or 5 of your neighbor's septic fields.
Or you have a neighbor that,
So-
that has financial difficulties and doesn't support their piece, so to speak. You've got,
So-
effectively got a common situation.
It
I
was-
didn't appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing functionally wrong, with
Yeah.
those types of situations, it was more, it was
being
more done in
abused.
a sense of, trying to simplify future maintenance issues, for property owners. Recognizing that not everybody even fully understands how a septic system works, or maybe that they even have one. So,
The Maine State Plumbing Code does require if 3 or more users are on a single system, there's supposed to be a maintenance agreement between those 3 owners.
yeah, well, I think the state probably learned,
Right. I don't know that everybody submits those,
Right.
but it is intended.
so, and in situation, and I've had, we've had situations where you're dealing with these types of easements. My suggestion is that, if we go down this road for dealing with this particular one, I also prefer to see that there winds up being a deed restriction on the deed. Because ultimately, sometimes just having, something that's in a subdivision findings of fact, can get, I don't want to say it gets lost, but it's not, for future owners, you have that deed restriction there, that's pretty quick and easy to find, for future owners. Just having it memorialized, and we've seen this before where, you may have language that says, subject to, restrictions as set forth by the planning board. Well, sometimes good luck in following the bunny trail and finding the document that spells all those things out. Having a deed restriction in place makes it very clear, and it's found pretty quickly.
And in this case, what would the deed restriction specify?
Well, I think it would just, whatever condition that the board comes up with, like just what you're outlining, Jim.
okay.
That when
I
this.
just wanted to be
Yeah,
clear.
when this happens, then this happens,
I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to say that at such time, Lot B was listed for sale, before that happened, Lot A would construct a new septic system?
Right, I might suggest the better trigger might be when someone applies for a permit for Lot B. That would be the official. Listing it for sale with a broker maybe wouldn't be enough notification to the town. I would say when someone went to get a building permit for that lot, that would be the trigger to notify code enforcement with regard to that there were things that needed to happen.
Okay, but what about timeliness? Okay, so some guy applies for a permit, and so then he's relying on Block A to quickly build a new septic system. What happens if Block A says, okay, I'll get to it in 10 years? Then what happens to Block B? Is he in limbo? How can you enforce Block A to build a new
you wanna
septic
come-
system?
Let me let Dr. McMahon address that directly. He's the owner of both lots. I don't.
Yes, I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
Currently.
Yeah.
Yes. So my name is Jim McMahon. I own these lots. We came before the planning board to create these lots based on, we were allowed by the original subdivision for Bishop Woods to do that. When we did it, I wasn't aware, I thought it was more difficult to get a new driveway across the stream. And I thought we would have to go around the septic system to create the lot. That's why the lot looks the way it does, and there's an easement for it. We found out that it was easy to get, or relatively clearly possible to get the crossing of the stream. And then we had this idea that maybe we could continue to use the septic system if we had an easement to use it until it failed. I wasn't I'm hoping that it doesn't have to be, the use has to stop when the lot is sold. We'd like to be able to keep,
Yeah, I'd be
This is- in other
You
words,
think you
that's.
can get someone to buy the lot with such an
Exact-
easement?
Exactly. And
Yeah,
if,
I
and if
think-
they can't or won't, then we have to do the adjustment then. But that, if you could consider that possibility. This other thing would trigger something that sounds pretty complicated in the selling of the lot. The most likely purchaser of this lot at this time is our daughter.
I guess
So-
that's the part I didn't mention because it wasn't for sure, but he came to me from the beginning saying his daughter would like to build onto that lot, so
So this is,
it's kind of the position we were working from. I guess she could buy it at some point. You're gonna sell it to her?
who?
Your daughter?
Yes, in the septic system or the,
No,
but yes,
the house
she's,
lot,
yeah,
right.
the house lot. That's
So I guess then Dr. McMahon is making the request beyond what I've suggested.
a little bit.
Would he be able to continue the use of that easement until it actually failed?
We're just asking if this is a possibility to go forward, to come back again with the final plan.
Right.
Okay, okay, so, I don't know how these things fail, but, so it fails. Why wouldn't you wanna just dig it out and replace it and continue to use it on a shared basis? What would induce you to build a new one on block A or plot A?
Ironically, Frick Associates, my old company, originally had a design permitted and approved for the location I show. Quite frankly, it was going to require a pump station.
Oh, yeah.
And I think hence they went to the site that was downhill a little bit, but further into the other lot. And that's a Frick Associates bed design too. Gee, it's working so well, like I say, I hate like heck to dig up something that's functioning.
Well, but that's my point. Okay, it's working great, so then it fails somehow. So, and let's say that Dr. Mann's daughter buys Lot B. They're both sharing that particular septic system.
Oh, they're not sharing the
No, they're
system.
not sharing.
Never intended to share.
New house, new
Gonna
new
build a
septic.
new one.
If the septic system is there being used by Lot A, the purchasers of Lot B would build their own septic system.
But see, that's still my point.
And Lot A
The one on the right. Yep,
would now have to build their own septic.
Okay.
because it failed.
Okay,
there is a
so-
spot on Lot
okay, so
A
here-
to
So here's
build
another,
this,
here's
so-
another situation. Okay, so your daughter buys Lot B, you still own Lot A. Some reason you sell Lot A, and all this stuff transfers. So the new owner of Lot A is using the easement of the septic on Lot B. So then your daughter wants to build a house, so she applies for a permit, and then part of the permit is that the owner on Lot A has to build a septic system. Well, why would you bother? He's already fixed up with the septic system on Lot B, and he's just gonna wait, you know? What's gonna induce him to do anything?
It would be deed restriction.
It would be the
Well,
deed
so,
restriction.
so the application of, for a permit to build on Lot B would be recorded in a deed restriction that Lot A would have to build their own septic system. Is that the idea? It's a deed restriction that Lot A has to build a septic system as soon as a permit to build a house is filed up for Lot B. Is that the idea?
I think that was what he
Jim's
was,
idea. I
There,
don't
there
think
is
that-
another alternative, you know, to this, you know, and I'm just offering this up kind of as, you know, as another way to maybe solve the issue, but, you know, one of the other alternatives is to have the existing field that's currently in place just go along with Lot A. So Lot A arrives already with a field in place, okay? And Lot B, you know, with the current house, so you only wind up with one with the one new system. So Lot B winds up putting in a new system for the existing house, but Lot A already has the benefit of a pre-existing field
I think
that's
You
there.
have the A and B
you got the
backwards,
lot
but-
split. Lot A is the one to the right.
Oh, sorry, right.
But
But you understand what I'm saying, is that the vacant lot gets the current field.
When?
I've never seen a septic right of way. It's new to
Yeah,
me.
It's,
And I
it
understand that
exists.
it happens,
Yep.
everybody's nodding their head.
Yeah.
So, the worst happens, and I'm not gonna look at anybody, God forbid. And, we now have 2 new owners
Yeah,
of these property.
yeah.
So these will be deed restrictions. These are restrictions on the deed, not on the property owner.
Well, I
thought
mean,
you were
that-
talking about
They go
changing
with
the
the
property
property,
line and
not,
well,
not,
deed restriction runs with the property, you know,
Goes with
so
the
any,
property.
you know, new or current owners would then be
That's the
bound
legal work
by,
I was
you know,
talking
would be
about.
bound by the restrictions.
Well,
You
what
know-
happens if they don't go along with it? What happens if they
They
sell?
don't buy.
they don't buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
Can I
don't
make-
do
Well, that-
due
and that's
diligence.
my whole-
That's
Okay,
the
what
point
happens
of
if-
putting
what
it
happens
in
if
the
they-
deed.
What happens if they buy it and then they come in
And then
with a
they read the deed
proposal?
afterwards?
Then they propose a modification of the deed.
Can
See, I
just-
still,
Can I clarify
I'm still hung up on
somebody's
this sharing the septic system, well, not
But you
sharing,
see-
but,
Can I just clarify one thing? We're not talking about sharing. the
current-
I know,
septic
you're talking about having
On the vacant
the
lot.
septic system for Lot A located on Lot B.
Yes.
And it seems like it's, there's a
Until such
potential
time as-
conflict until such time as.
The reason for that is it just makes it's a more logical.
Oh, I can see what's going on, yeah, sure.
But that,
It's just it's just you're building in a future potential conflict, regardless of what the deed says, you know.
the other point, though, there's plenty of options for septic systems for a builder of a new house on Lot B.
That's not the issue.
Okay.
The issue is non-cooperation by owner A to follow through with the deed requirements.
never happened, not once in human history.
That's what I'm saying, it never happened, right? So, I mean, it just seems to me that you're
That's what you
building a
have
potential
lawyers for.
That's what
conflict.
they
That's
have
right.
lawyers for. That's
The only thing I could say
That's
is
what you have
that
lawyers for, exactly. Then it just takes time, see?
So,
Okay.
so can we, guys, can we try to bring this back? We seem to be going down the rabbit hole here. I'll just make the comment one more time, that it seems, I asked my question up front: why would you want to do this? Why do you want to straighten the property line? And I thought I understood the answer was, well, so it would make the currently vacant lot more appealing to a buyer. And then I understood that the most likely buyer is your daughter, who is certainly willing to go
at
along
this
with the
moment.
current situation. Or it just seems like we're making an awful lot of hoorah here over something that is just a crooked line right now, and you want to straighten it out.
Well,
Can we-
that's
you know-
why we brought it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
To see if you thought that, or
That's, and if you look here,
It's not an insignificant area of upland.
that's what I
Yeah.
guess that's the point. He came right to the point that I was gonna make, is that one of the adjustments we'd like to make, number one, the offset that's current allows nothing to happen here at all. That's one of my points.
It's a
That-
pinch-
this
pinch
is-
point.
This is worthless land to this building lot, which, if this was straight, would be a whole lot more usable.
Got it.
And
But there's a field, there's a septic field there.
septic field there.
You can't build it there
Yeah.
anyway.
until it fails, you can remove it
But-
and use the land.
But
If it's failed, it's gone, it's out of there, it's removed. It becomes usable, buildable area. Matter of fact, that's one of the biggest problems I have as a septic designer, my
Yeah.
septic systems. They compete with all the best buildings.
So I'm sorry, I thought you said that if it failed, it, obviously the easement would terminate or what have you.
Right.
The new leach field would be built in the same spot for the new building. I thought that's what I heard.
It could be,
So-
it could be, and that would be its best location for gravity flow with that house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's, as a designer, I thought it was a sensible change to make, because if a house was gonna go predominantly here, then a field for a house here is perfect. Makes perfect sense. But I needed to get to the board to sound the board before we could even run that route.
So what did you decide the board felt about it?
Yeah, what's our outcome?
I feel like we're getting all wrapped around the axle here.
It still boils down to, is the board comfortable with us establishing an easement to make this lot line adjustment?
I think we,
For septic.
what I heard was we would be okay with that, and it's going to encumber the deeds.
That's fine. That's exactly the answer I
Okay.
was looking for.
Can I jump in quick, just with a couple questions? When was this originally approved, this subdivision? The s-
Bishop Woods, I think, was back in 1992 originally, or something
the-
like
sorry,
that.
the-
It was
the-
early 90s.
The lot split, because this parcel A and
When did you
parcel
make
B,
the split?
when was that split?
So that was,
Division of Lot 1 plan, that's what this plan is from, where's this date here?
Yeah, I didn't see it on here.
2010.
Yeah, there's a date, it's above the word land
in the fine
surveyor, so I
print.
can't read it.
In the fine print.
Maybe your bigger one.
You have a bigger one.
2010, November 23rd, 2010.
So
Yep.
I was not on the planning board in 2010, but I'm assuming that the lot split was subject to these regulations that are in place today. Is that correct or no?
So this, if I recall correctly, this split was actually, was identified in the original subdivision plan in the 90s. you
That's
know,
correct. There were
where
only 2
the-
lots allowed to
Right,
split
where the
again.
board specifically allowed for, it unusual, but, there were, I think, 2 lots in this subdivision.
His was one, and the one
Yeah,
across the street was
right,
the other one.
That had, that had an allowance in it that would allow those lots to be further subdivided in the future.
Without coming to the planning board.
Correct.
Ah.
Yeah.
So would this,
Yeah, if I remember that correctly, I mean, I'm going off of memory,
Like
but there,
pre-approved.
They came
there
to
was
the
a
planning board
pre-approval
with the
back in
house
the early
location.
90s.
I guess, where I'm going with this line of questioning is, was that lot split subject to this restriction in the current subdivision regulations where it says septic systems serving a structure on one lot are not allowed to be located on abutting or neighboring lots? So I'm kind of piggybacking off of
I think
Nina's question, is this a waiver scenario, or when that occurred, when you split the lots, was this even,
If you're back to, I believe
restriction.
it was in place at the time, I'm not positive, 2010, that might have come along a little after that. Ocean Sound, I think, might have been the actual subdivision that changed the reg in the ordinance, when the ordinance changed. I think Brian Shaw had something to do
I
with
want to
that.
say it was, I'm just looking at the dates, in the history and the subregs. We had, 2002 subregs, and then we had modifications were made in 2013, and then we had modifications in 17, and then we just had the other set of mods that we made. So I believe it was 2013 when when there were substantive changes that were made to the subdivision regs.
It may have been at that time. So that may not have been in place at that time, but obviously this configuration was because at that time, that's where his field was.
right?
So, again, hence, we're back to you, and I'm kind of,
I see it as, and not in this particular instance at all, but just generally speaking, it's a way of getting around this particular section of the subdivision regs. You carve out a section where you've got the septic on one, and then you
yeah, I
realign it a year or two down the road.
I
I'm not
could
saying
agree,
that's
I
here,
could agree with
but-
that if it was a year or 2 down the
Right,
road, but this
yeah.
is nothing like that.
So that's where
I-
that's where I was trying to go. Does this even apply in
Right.
this
I'm very
scenario?
aware of the notion of circumventing the rules. DEP has that wording in all of their standards, and didn't want to give anybody the impression that this was going around a rule. They had,
Yeah,
there was no prior knowledge that this was going to be the case.
Yeah.
This just came to them upon their careful consideration, because him and his wife do a lot of sort of mental calculation over how this might play. And I know a lot of thought went into it even prior to me coming to the board with these 3 items. And if I might, I don't want to confuse things further. The one other thing I didn't put on my plan, and really doesn't affect you folks at all, is Jim and his wife were considering from here, a very slight declination here like this. But, again, this change or this change would not affect net calculations on this lot at all. So it might be in their range of possibilities to make this minor change. Also, I'm just bringing it to the board's attention because if that appears in the next iteration of Leon's plan, should we bring a revised plan back to you, I didn't want you to be surprised.
Who's Liam?
Leon Blood is the owner of Lower Village Survey. He would be the
Oh,
person.
I see. You said
we-
he's
I
going to
didn't-
have a new plan. I
Well, I didn't
confused.
want to spend Dr. McMahon and Susan McMahon's
Got
money
it.
to revise this plan until such time as
You
we.
you don't want to go relay this out.
So I guess my main question is then, this After you talk to us, what becomes of this document? You throw it away and start a fresh one with Leon's?
No, I think
Changes?
well, that document still is the application for why we're here. What I bring as a result of your comments tonight, hopefully, is a revised plan with Leon's changes that you get to examine with your eyes and determine, is that in keeping with what Jim proposed to us in the last meeting, and is it something we can approve? I understand that the shared easement, I took the gentleman's point that that might not even be part of your purvey. I wanted to bring all the issues that might bear before the board, including the easement and the shared driveway, because we got a permit by rule from DEP for an alternative driveway. I thought that that was sensible to bring to the board's attention because it's part of this array of possible changes that are going to happen here.
Well, is the easement something that we actually consider? Couldn't, since they own both lots, couldn't they just do that by deed anyway?
I came to the board tonight because Werner suggested I ought to be in front of the board tonight.
He's always doing that to us.
Yeah, he always does that to us.
He doesn't want to make the call himself.
Well, thanks, Werner.
Yeah.
So 10 years ago, 9 years ago, you divided the lot. If only you could have done it differently.
Correct, and he didn't ask the right questions back then.
Yeah, gotcha.
That's all I would say.
Yeah.
You know, you learn along
staring
the
at it
way.
for
I'm
9
sorry, you
years,
learn
like
along the
How
way.
old is this fully functional septic tank, by the way?
Your system was built in what year when the house? 1988, and Mark Welch installed it, by the way. Not one of his kids, but Mark himself.
Okay.
Imagine that. Something going on down there?
Okay, hey, guys.
No, sorry. I'm okay with, I mean, I'm fine with it. It's,
Okay, so I think this sounds like we consider that this application is not yet complete,
I would agree with that.
that you're going to provide us.
You have sounded us.
You've sounded us out, and I believe the answer is we're going to go with the 3 items.
Okay, we'll revise the plan then, and you also want to see a revised deed with deed restrictions. Or
Just to
possibly
be
both.
clear, if he extends it to this item 4, the wedge in the back, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't see a problem with that
Okay,
either.
good,
Yeah.
good. That's what we needed to know.
makes the.
Yeah.
probably
We can,
makes that
we can
lot-
make,
Do it
we'll
all at
make,
once, though.
we'll make plan revisions and resubmit them to you. I'll try to
A
get,
recommendation for what the deed restrictions would be on both A and B would be helpful.
Yeah.
How are you going to capture this for
Yeah.
for posterity? So that you're comfortable, and then, in turn, we'd be comfortable.
yep, okay. We thank you.
And a plan that gives the before and after and a step-by-step, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, you know, 1, 2, 3.
In terms of the deed restrictions,
Yeah.
not the plan from Leon, but the plan for
The
the.
changes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Good. Absolutely, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, so we are not going to vote it complete.
Got it. We'll return to the board when we've got that completed plan, that revised plan, and some deed language. Thank
And
you.
at which point I will assign unless one of you fine people would like to accept.
I thought you were gonna have Scott do, but I'll do
I
it.
was gonna have Scott do it.
Yeah,
but
let Scott
it's
do
a
it.
whole lot more complex than,
I'll do it, yeah.
there you go.
make him try to
Yeah.
view it on the thing. So, okay, so Larry owns this one.
All right, thanks, yeah, all right.
Which leads us to everybody's favorite part,
Oh, yeah,
reading
doctor.
of finding of facts.
Yeah. Stretch.
Now,
Oh, yeah.
we could take this out of order since poor
Yeah, that's a
Steve
good
and
idea.
and Sean have been back there.
Yeah.
We could do item 5 first.
I think that's.
No, let's do it
Yeah.
last.
Unless you really want to stay for all of it.
You like us, don't you? Want us around.
Those chairs are so wonderful and
Yeah, there's
comfortable.
the comfy
right.
chairs, that's right. So, item 5 is the Kennebunkport Marina finding of facts, and Ed is going to read that.
The Kennebunkport Planning Board findings of fact and decision on the application for boat storage facility at 83 Log Cabin Road, Kennebunkport, Maine 04046. Following site plan reviews pursuant to the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance held on 17 July, 7 August, and 4 September 2019, and public hearings held on 7 August and 4 September 2019. The Kennebunkport Planning Board makes the following findings of fact and conclusions and renders the following decision, subject to the conditions enumerated below. Findings of fact are as follows. The applicant is the Kennebunkport Marina, a.k.a. KPT Marina, LLC, or the applicant, with a mailing address of P.O. Box 2734, Kennebunkport, Maine 04046. The property has a street address of 83 Log Cabin Road, Kennebunkport, Maine 04046. The property is identified as Map 2, Block 1, Lot 10, on the municipal tax assessor's maps. 4, the owner of record of the property is Chickadee Enterprises, LLC, P.O. Box 2778, Kennebunkport, Maine 04046. 5, the property is located in the Farm and Forest Zone. 6, the applicant authorized Sebago Technics, Inc. of South Portland, Maine, to prepare the application and act as their agent for this matter in a letter dated 24 June 2019. The applicant was represented by Stephen G. Doe of Sebago Technics at the meetings. Sean Dumas, the operations manager for the Kennebunkport Marina, also attended and supported the proceedings. 7, the applicant has demonstrated a legal interest in the property by providing a quit claim deed recorded in York County Registry of Deeds, Book 17542, page 799, on 21 August 2017, showing ownership by Chickadee Enterprises, LLC, and a signed contract for sale of the property by Chickadee Enterprises, LLC to KPT Marine, LLC in March 2019. KPT Marine, LLC does business as Kennebunkport Marina, as confirmed by its Maine State corporate registration. Item 8, the property comprises 3.31 acres, more or less, and is currently undeveloped. 9, in an application dated 26 June 2019, the applicant proposes to build a boat storage facility on the property. Because the land use ordinance lists boat storage facility as a conditional use in the farm and forest zone, site plan review and approval by the planning board is required. 10, 2 supplements to the initial application were submitted by the applicant to incorporate changes resulting from planning board review and public comments. A, site plan review application supplemental submission, July 2019, and B, site plan review application second supplemental submission, August 2019. A complete set of updated site plan drawings, all sheets revised as of 14 August 2019, was included in the second supplemental submission. 11, 2 storage buildings are proposed. One larger, Building A, at 11,610 square feet, and one smaller, Building B, at 2,268 square feet. The applicant advised the board that the larger Building A would be built first and would store up to 30 boats. Building B would be built in the future and would store a few boats and equipment. 12, spaces for 11 boats outside of the storage buildings are identified in the revised site plans. During discussion about visual appearance from the road and abutting properties, the applicant told the board fully rigged sailboats would not be stored outside. 13, per the revised plans, 1.7 acres of the 3.11 acre property would be developed, including 0.9 acres of impervious surface. This is a reduction from the initial plans, which called for 2.11 acres to be developed with 1.38 acres of impervious surface. Following public comment, with the help of the Kennebunkport Cemetery Committee, a small family cemetery was located in the southeast corner of the property toward the rear along the Fairfield Hill Road side. The applicant proposes to place marker stones at the 4 corners of the cemetery plot and maintain the required 25-foot setback from any development. 15, to achieve the cemetery setbacks, the revised plans move the proposed location of Building B to the front of the property, approximately 50 foot from Log Cabin Road and 75 foot from Fairfield Hill Road. The applicant proposes to side the building with clapboards instead of metal to be more compatible in appearance with other buildings in the vicinity. 16, Visual buffers from the road and from abutters' properties are proposed by retaining existing woodlands to the degree possible and augmenting those woodlands with evergreen plantings. Visual buffering and appearance were discussed at some length over the course of the review process. The revised plans reflect this in the location of the main entrance, which was adjusted to reduce visual impact on the neighboring property directly across Log Cabin Road, and in the reduction in paved area in order to retain more woodlands as a visual buffer from the street and from abutting properties. The facility's connection to the electric grid was initially proposed via overhead wires, but changed to an underground connection in the revised plans in order to improve general appearances. Item 17, because the revised site plans reduce the impervious surface to less than 1 acre, an MDEP stormwater permit by rule is required, rather than the MDEP stormwater permit by law described in the initial submittal. This eliminated the formal requirement for stormwater quality treatment. However, to address concerns raised by the board about board top washing, the applicant has agreed to implement best management practices for stormwater quality treatment by providing a Filterra waste treatment and a wastewater treatment and subsurface gravel wetland. The applicant also provided the board with a copy of an email from the MDEP agreeing that MDEP considers the potential pollutants from this top washing to be so minimal that they do not regulate it. Item 18. The applicant advised the board that this will be a low-use facility, staffed typically with 4 employees from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. from October through June, unless an emergency, for example, a hurricane, required additional hours. From June to October, there will be very little activity, as the boats would be brought out of storage and most work would transition to the Kennebunkport Marina. Top washing of boats would routinely be performed at this facility, outside of the buildings on the paved surfaces. Bottom washing, that is, pressure washing the underside, will normally be done at another facility in Biddeford. In the unusual circumstance that a boat is bottom washed at this facility, a portable containment equipment system will be used to collect the wastewater, which will then be disposed of in accordance with state and federal regulations. Documentation describing the collection equipment and procedures was provided in the first supplemental submission, July 2019. Item 19, entry and exit to the facility would be via a new curb cut on Log Cabin Road. An MDOT application has been filed with that request. A second entrance/exit from the Fairfield Hill Road was included in the initial application, but subsequently deleted after a question was raised by the planning board about whether the property had the right to use that private road. 20, the applicants have requested no submission or performance waivers from the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance. 21, pursuant to the requirements of Article 10A of the Land Use Ordinance, Guidelines for Decisions, the planning board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following identified findings which would otherwise compel denial. Item A, the proposed use meets the definition or specific requirements set forth in the land use ordinance and will be in compliance with applicable state or federal laws. The finding is yes. The proposed use will not create fire safety hazards and will provide adequate access to the site or to the buildings on the site for emergency vehicles. The finding is yes, with comments saying that the site plans have been reviewed by the Kennebunkport Fire Chief, and the Chief's approval letter from 1 August 2019 was provided to the board by the applicant. All changes requested by the Chief in his letter have been incorporated into the plans. A street number has been added to the proposed sign at the entrance. Boat storage along the front of the Building A has been eliminated to provide improved access for fire equipment. A continuously monitored fire alarm system with battery backup will be provided for both buildings, and a Knox box will be provided for emergency access. Item C, the proposed exterior lighting will not create hazards to motorists traveling on adjacent public streets and is adequate for the safety of occupants or users of the site and will not damage the value and diminish the usability of adjacent properties. Finding yes. Comments. Exterior lighting is low wattage affixed to the building and motion activated only. Full cutoff fixtures are planned so as not to cast light or glare off-site. Item D, the provisions for buffers and on-site landscaping provide for adequate protection to neighboring properties from detrimental features of the development. Finding is yes. Comments, the larger storage building is located near the center of the property to maximize the separation from neighboring properties. The smaller building is located closer to the road, but will be clapboard sided to more closely resemble the other structures along the road. Existing woodlands will be retained around the perimeter of the property and augmented by evergreen plantings to improve the four-season visual screening. Appropriate on-site landscaping is shown on the site plans submitted by the applicant. E, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the use and peaceful enjoyment of abutting properties as a result of noise, vibration, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or other cause. The finding is yes. This is a low-use facility for boat storage and light maintenance. Item F, the provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular pedestrian circulation on the site and into adjacent public streets will not create hazards to safety. Finding is yes. Comments, a traffic memorandum was provided by the applicant discussing vehicle circulation, site distances, and how trucks with boat trailers will maneuver entering and exiting the site. Pedestrian circulation is not applicable. Item G, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. And the finding is yes. Comments, this concern was raised by abutters, who offered a letter from a local realtor stating her professional opinion that the value of adjacent residential properties would be negatively affected by this nearby commercial use. The applicant provided a report prepared by Core Market Solutions, LLC, a property valuation company that offered a different opinion. The report analyzed recent residential property sales near commercial properties in 3 main communities. The report found that the presence of a commercial property did not significantly affect the values of the neighboring residential properties, stating that the quality of the neighborhood overall is a stronger determinant of the desirability of the underlying real estate as opposed to a single or multiple commercial facilities present. Faced with these differing views, the board believes that the applicant has made reasonable modifications to the plan to preserve appearance and a visual buffer in order to avoid impacting the values of adjacent properties. Item H, the design of the site will not result in significant flood hazards or flood damage and is in conformance with applicable flood hazard protection requirements. Finding is yes. Comments, this property is not in the flood zone. Stormwater management facilities are proposed to control runoff from the site. Item I, adequate provision has been made for the disposal of wastewater or solid waste and for the prevention of ground or surface water contamination. Finding is yes. A new septic system has excess capacity. 4 employees are planned. The septic is sized for up to 25 employees. Item J, adequate provision has been made to control erosion or sedimentation. Finding is yes. Comments, yes. Comments, erosion control measures are included as part of the site plans. Item K, adequate provision has been made to handle stormwater runoff or other drainage problems on the site. Finding is yes. Comments, the applicant has provided a report showing that stormwater runoff will be adequately managed for the site. Project requires an MDEP stormwater permit by rule, which has been filed. A filtration structure and subsurface gravel wetland will be provided for stormwater quality treatment. L, the proposed water supply will meet the demands for the proposed use or for fire protection purposes. Finding was yes. A private well will serve the facility. The fire chief has reviewed the plans and has no concerns. Item M, adequate provision has been made for the transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous substances and materials as defined by state law. Finding is not applicable. Comments, no hazardous substances or materials are used by the facility. Item N, the proposed use will not have an adverse effect on significant scenic vistas or on significant wildlife habitat, nor will have such an impact that could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding is yes, the proposed changes will not affect scenic vistas or significant wildlife habitat. O, the proposed use will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion. Finding is yes. Comment, the proposed changes will not cause unreasonable highway/public road ingress or egress. A traffic memorandum has been provided by the applicant regarding the entering and exiting of vehicles from the site. An MDOT entrance permit has been applied for. Item P, existing off-site ways and traffic facilities can safely and conveniently accommodate the increased traffic generated by the development as far away from the development as the effects of the development can be traced with reasonable accuracy. The finding is yes, the proposed changes will not increase traffic. A traffic memorandum has been provided by the applicant regarding the entering and exiting of vehicles from the site, and an MDOT entrance permit has been applied for. Conclusions. Articles 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance mandates that the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial. And as noted above, the Board makes no such findings. Decision, the site plan application identified above is hereby approved. Conditions of approval, if any, pursuant to Articles 10.11 and 10.12E. 1. Pursuant to Article 10.11, the Planning Board attaches the following conditions to the approval of this application. A, the existing woodland buffers and additional plantings that provide visual buffering must be maintained. B, the facility's low level of use, as described above in item 18, must not be increased. Item 2, the applicant, pursuant to 10.12E, shall notify the Planning Board prior to the transfer of rights to construct an approved project. 3, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of such recordation in the York County Register of Deeds before any permits may issue or before any construction activity may commence. And item 4, the applicant shall comply with all terms and conditions of the Town of Kennebunkport ordinances, the MDOT entrance permit, and the main DEP approvals, dated 18 September 2019. I thank you.
Okay. So, quite offending effects.
Do you have a motion?
Please.
Make a motion to approve the findings of fact.
Okay. All in favor? Okay. Well, good. George, you're up.
Kennebunkport Planning Board findings of fact and decision, application of Kennebunkport Conservation Trust, Richardson Associates, and Walsh Engineering authorized agents, Meadowbrook Wood Reserve, to create a nature park and preserve new trails and a welcome hut. Findings of fact. Following a site plan pursuant to the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance held on 21 August 2019 and a public hearing on 4 September 2019, the Kennebunkport Planning Board makes the following findings and conclusions and renders the following decision subject to the conditions enumerated below. Findings of fact. 1. The owner is a Kennebunkport Conservation Trust. 2. In a letter dated July 8, 2019, Tom Bradbury, Executive Director, has authorized Richardson and Associates and Walsh Engineering to act as the agents for this matter. 3. The property has a street address of Mills Road, Kennebunkport, Maine 04046. 4. The mailing address is P.O. Box 7009, Cape Porpoise, Maine 04104. 5. The property is located in the Goose Rocks and Free Enterprise zones. 6. The property consists of 43.57 acres, more or less, is identified as Map 42, Block 1, Lot 8, and Map 42, Block 1, Lot 2A1 in the municipal tax assessor's maps. 7. The owner has demonstrated a legal interest in the property by providing quitclaim deeds recorded in the York County Registry of Deeds as Book 117814, pages 307 through 311, dated October 2nd, 2018. 8. The property is vacant open land, water, and forest with an existing farm road. 9. In an application dated July 7, 2019, the applicant proposes to add a nature park, including a welcome hut, road improvement, ADA trail, parking, water features, water treatment, and a dog park. 10. A park is a conditional use in both the Goose Rocks and Free Enterprise zones, which must be approved by the Planning Board based on Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinances 4.11 and 4.12. Guidelines for decisions. Pursuant to the requirements of Article 10.10.a of the Land Use Ordinance, Guidelines for Decisions, the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following identified findings which would otherwise compel denial. A, the proposed use meets the definition of or specific requirements set forth in the Land Use Ordinance and will be in compliance with applicable state or federal laws. Finding yes. B, the proposed use will not create fire safety hazards and will provide adequate access to the site or to the buildings on the site for emergency vehicles. Finding yes. C, the proposed exterior lighting will not create hazards to motorists traveling on adjacent public streets and is adequate for the safety of occupants or users of the site and will not damage the value and diminish the usability of adjacent properties. Finding yes. D, the provisions for buffers and on-site landscaping provide for adequate protection to neighboring properties from detrimental features of the development. Finding not applicable. E, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the use and peaceful enjoyment of abutting property owners and as a result of noise, vibrations, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or other cause. Finding yes. F, the provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular and pedestrian circulation on the site and onto adjacent public streets will not create hazards to safety. Finding yes. G, the proposed use will not have a significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, nor has a significant detrimental effect which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes. H, the design of the site will not result in significant flood hazards or flood damage and is in conformance with applicable flood hazard protection requirements. Finding yes. I, adequate provision has been made for disposal of wastewater or solid waste and for the prevention of ground or surface water contamination. Finding yes. J, adequate provision has been made to control erosion or sedimentation. Finding yes. K, adequate provision has been made to handle stormwater runoff or other drainage problems on the site. Finding yes. L, the proposed water supply will meet the demands of the proposed use for fire protection purposes. Finding yes. M, adequate provision has been made for the transportation, storage, and disposal of hazardous substances and materials as defined by state law. Finding not applicable. N, the proposed use will not have an adverse impact on significant scenic vistas or on significant wildlife habitat, nor will it have such an impact that could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes. O, the proposed use will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion. Finding yes. P, existing off-site ways and traffic facilities can safely and conveniently accommodate the increased traffic generated by the development as far away from the development as the effects of the development can be traced with reasonable accuracy. Finding yes. Any negative finding by the board means that the application has been denied. The application is otherwise complete. Conclusions. Articles 10.10.a of the Land Use Ordinance mandates that the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial, and as noted above, the Board makes no such findings. Decision. The site plan application identified above is hereby approved. Conditions of the approval, if any, pursuant to Article 10.11 and 10.12.e. 1. The applicant pursuant to 10.12.e shall notify the Planning Board prior to the transfer of rights to construct an approved project. No assignment or transfer of rights to construct an approved project is valid without prior review and approval by the Planning Board of a new performance guarantee to ensure that any assignee or transferee has the financial capacity to undertake or complete the project. There's a typo. There should be 2. 2, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of such recordation in the form of a copy thereof attested by the Register of Deeds before any permits may be issued or before any construction activity may commence. Dated 18 September 2019.
Move to accept the findings of fact as read.
Second.
All in favor?
You're voting.
Okay. All right, that brings us up to one more finding of facts. This is the application of Paul and Lisa Henderson, 2 Main Street, Kennebunkport, Maine. Following site plan reviews pursuant to the Kennebunk Land Use Ordinance on 21 August 2019 and a public hearing held on 4 September 2019, Kennebunkport Planning Board makes the following findings of facts in conclusion and renders the following decision subject to the conditions enumerated below. 1, the applicants are Paul and Lisa Henderson, P.O. Box 2790, Kennebunkport 04046. The The property has a street address of number 2 Main Street, Kennebunkport, Maine, 04046. The property is identified as map 11, block 3, lot 1 on the municipal tax assessor map. Property is located in village residential zone with both shoreland and resource protection overlays. The applicant authorized Peterson Design Group to act as their agent for this matter in a letter dated 9 July 2019. The applicant was represented by Mr. Eric Peterson at the proceedings. The applicant has demonstrated legal interest in the property by providing warranty deed recorded in the New York County Registry of Deeds, Book 17962, pages 19 and 20 on 3 June 2019. The property measures approximately 298 feet wide, 70 feet deep, and comprises 8116 square feet per on-site measurement data provided by the applicant. Contains a 2-story, 2-family resident with 3,018 square feet of living space according to the property card. Water and sewer are public. Lot structure is legally non-conforming based on the survey data provided by the applicant. The upland lot area is, oh, that typo didn't get in, okay, is 8116 square feet, which is below the 40,000 square feet, right? I'm supposed to say 40 there.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, another square feet minimum. The structure is entirely within the 75-foot setback of the Mill Pond high water mark. C, minimum setbacks for side and rear are 15 feet, are not met. D, lot coverage is 48%, which exceeds the 20% maximum. An application dated 29 July 2019, the applicant proposes to remove the existing 2-family house and replace it with a more conforming, smaller 2-family house. Previous house covered 48% of the entire property and 41% of the upland portion of the property. The new house will cover only 36% of the upland and will not overlap the mill pond at all. B, interior square footage will decrease from 3040 to 2691 square feet. Interior volume will decrease from 30,210 to 24,460 cubic feet. Exterior dimensions will decrease from 77 wide by 59 deep to 76 by 36. The lowest floor of the existing building has an elevation of 7.55 feet plus or minus, which is lower than the required 11 feet with the current and proposed FEMA flood maps. The new building will be supported on piles so that the bottom of the building will be above the required FEMA elevation, have a finished interior floor no lower than 16.5 feet to provide significant margin. As required by the land use ordinance, 4 parking spaces will be provided, 2 on the northwest side of the building, 20 by 40, and 2 tandem spaces on the southeast side of the building, 10 by 40. 12, to reduce the chances of bird strikes, the applicant has promised to screen roughly 50% of the windows on the mill pond side of the house. 13, the applicant has requested no submission or performance waivers from the requirements of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance. 14, pursuant to the requirements of Article 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance Guidelines for Decisions, the Planning Board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes a negative ruling on one or more of the following identified findings which would otherwise compel denial. A, proposed use meets the definition and specific requirements set forth in the land use ordinance and will be in compliance with applicable state and federal law. Finding yes. Comment, the proposed changes will not increase existing nonconformances. Lot coverage, building size are reduced. Required for parking spaces are provided. B, the proposed use will not create fire safety hazards and will provide access to the site or to the buildings on the site for emergency vehicles. Finding yes. C, the proposed exterior lighting will not create hazards to motorists, traveling on adjacent public streets and is adequate for safety of occupants or users of this site and will not damage the value and diminish the usability of adjacent properties. Finding yes, the applicant has agreed to have only residential low-level lighting on the exterior of the building, both street side and pond side. D, provision for buffers and on-site landscaping provide for adequate protection to neighboring properties from detrimental features of the development. Finding yes. E, the proposed use will not have significant detrimental effect on the use of peaceful enjoyment of abutting property as a result of noise, vibration, fumes, odor, dust, glare, or other cause. Finding yes. Provisions for vehicular loading and unloading and parking and for vehicular and pedestrian circulation on the site and onto adjacent public streets will not create hazards to safety. Finding yes. Comment. Considering the requirement for parking for 4 cars, the new configuration is no worse than the old. The applicants have agreed to backing their vehicles into the driveways when possible to minimize pedestrian and traffic impacts. G, the proposed use will not have significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes. Comment, much nicer looking building with nothing overhanging the mill pond. H, property use will not have significant detrimental effect on the value of adjacent properties, which could be avoided by reasonable modification of the plan. Finding yes. I, the design of the site will not result in significant flood hazards or flood damage and is in conformance with all applicable flood hazard protection requirements. Finding yes. Comment. No new design is significantly above flood hazard levels, unlike the old building. J, adequate provision has been made for disposal of wastewater or solid waste and for prevention of ground or surface water contamination. Finding yes. Public sewer, no change from existing. K, adequate provision has been made to control erosion and sedimentation. Yes. Comment, site plans for implementing the proposed changes include erosion control measures. L, adequate provision has been made to handle stormwater runoff or other drainage problems on site. Finding yes. M, the proposed water supply will meet demands of proposed use for fire protection services. Yes. Comment, public water, no change from existing. N, adequate provision has been made for the transportation, storage, disposal of hazardous substances and materials as defined by state law. Finding not applicable. Proposed use will not cause unreasonable highway or public road congestion. Finding yes. P, existing off-site ways and traffic facilities can safely and conveniently accommodate the increased traffic generated by development as far from the development as the effects of the development can be traced with reasonable accuracy. Finding not applicable. 15, when the proposed development will be located in the shoreland or resource protection zones, in addition to the requirements of the Land Use Ordinance Article 10, the townwide regulations of Article 6, and performance standards for specific activities in Article 7. Approval of development will also require the board make positive findings based on information presented that the proposed use A will maintain safe and healthful conditions. Finding yes. Will not result in water pollution, erosion, or sedimentation in surface waters. Finding yes. C, will adequately provide for dispersal of all wastewater. Yes. Comment, public sewer, no change from existing. D, will not have adverse impact on spawning grounds, fish, aquatic life, bird, and wildlife habitat. Yes. Comment, applicant has agreed to cover 50% of the glass windows on the pond side of the residents to reduce the chance of bird strikes. E, will conserve shore cover and visual as well as actual points of access to inland and coastal waters. Finding yes. F, will protect archaeological and historical resources as defined in the comprehensive plan. Finding not applicable. G, will avoid problems associated with floodplain development and use. Finding yes. H, is in conformance with performance standards as set in section 5.6 of the Kennebunkport Land Use Ordinance. Finding yes. Comment, erosion control measures are incorporated in implementation implementation plans for the proposed changes. Conclusions, Article 1010A of the Land Use Ordinance mandates that the planning board shall approve a site plan application unless it makes one or more identified findings that would otherwise compel denial. And as such, as noted above, the board makes no such findings. The site application is hereby approved. Conditions of approval. 1, the applicant pursuant to 1012E shall notify planning board relative to transfer of rights to construct an approved project. 2, the applicant shall ensure that approximately 50% of the windows on the Mill Pond side of the residence will have external screens. E, the applicant shall ensure that external lighting is appropriate for residents only. 4, the applicant must record a copy of this decision and provide proof of recordation in the York County Registry of Deeds before any permits may issue or construction activity may commence. 5, the applicant shall comply with all terms and conditions of the town of Kennebunkport ordinances as well as Maine DEP approvals dated 18 September 2019. Okay, and there are 3 things that require little initials on them, I'm afraid.
Move to approve findings as read.
All in favor?
I'm seconding.
Whatever.
All in favor?
Yes, all in favor.
Yep.
So,
Unanimous.
we get signing here in a second.
Well, we need to initial.
Okay, so you need to initial on the front page, and then I just did notice a word "in" that was missing somewhere on page 5. So, here,
So how many changes are there?
3. 1, 5, and 6.
Okay, these are for your signature.
Okay. And I guess we can take another motion here.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, we're done.
Unanimous on that one.